So let me do the screen share. You need to take the cover off of the TV set. See, can you guys see that on the TV set? Are we doing screen share?
It's not sure. I see it.
Okay. Oh, I see. Let me get rid of that. Well, let me make it bigger for you. Okay, so this is what I was talking about last week. So if you didn't hear this talk, you can find it on YouTube, I think. I don't know if it's been posted yet. These are 8 Japanese ways of bringing equanimity and joy to life plus one. The plus one is joy. Not that the Japanese are not joyous, but it wasn't on the original list. And I felt like right now we could use a little joy. So I talked about Kaizen, which is continuous improvement or effort, Ikigai, which is reason for being, Harahachibu, which means eat until you're 80% full. And what I talked about was oryoki, a Zen way of eating, which means just enough. And now we're going to talk about these last ones, Shinrin Yoku, forest bathing, Wabi Sabi, that you've probably heard about, Goman or Gaman, and then Omiyari and Kintsugi, which is the gold, when you repair a cup or something with gold, which probably most of you have heard of. And then the plus one is the joy part. Okay, so I don't want to spend a long time talking about Shinrin Yoku, which is forest bathing. You know, basically the theory behind this is that trees give out something called phytosides, which is a compound that causes us to be more relaxed, that causes us to, as we breathe it in, it drops our cortisol and blood pressure, and so that we literally physically are more relaxed. Now, personally, I mean, it's great that trees can do this, but I also think it can happen at the ocean, listening to the surf come in, any place out in nature, your backyard, listening to the insects or the birds or whatever. I think all of that relaxes us. And one of the reasons why I wanted to give these talks was because I was thinking about how stressful it is to live in this world right now. I don't know about you, but I think it's a little stressful. And so I think everything that we can do to help each other to de-stress and to help ourselves to de-stress is important. And so that's one of the reasons I wanted to talk about these various aspects. So I think really in a very straightforward way, I encourage all of us to go out in nature. And this doesn't mean we have to go very far, but you just go outside, you know. I don't know about where you live, but if I go outside in the morning before it's light, which I often do coming to Zazen these days, it's like I can't see all the stars, but I can see a lot of stars. And there's something about the air and being outside that's really rejuvenating, you know? I like to think about this as, we are made for this world. It's not an accident that being outside brings us joy because we are not separate from this. This is our world. This is what we are made for as human beings. All beings in this world are made for this world. Otherwise, I guess we'd be made for Mars, but we're not. We're made for Earth. And so Earth is beautiful, the thing, because it feeds us, because we are not separate from it. So I really encourage us to do that as much as possible. And I don't know about you, but I can sit in front of the computer all day answering emails and stuff like that, so I'd never go outside. So I encourage us all to do that. Okay, the next one is wabi sabi, and the root of this term is from Buddhism, and has to do with the three marks of existence. So in Buddhism, three primary characteristics of existence are impermanence, suffering, and no inherently existing self. So don't we all know that everything is impermanent? And we're just talking about the Four Noble Truths. And they are the source of our suffering is often uh, not getting what we want and getting what we don't want. And this idea about perpetuation of the self in a way that's not helpful. Like when we get really some idea about something and we get very rigid about it, and then we get in fights about it or whatever, or get very stressed about it. So that's a way that causes suffering. Impermanence is if when we are getting something we don't want, we usually think it's going to last forever. We don't say to ourselves, this is not going to last forever. We say, this is it, woe is me, I'm stuck forever. It's always going to be this way. This person's always going to be in my life. I can't stand them. I sit next to them at work, whatever it is, right? And then, so that's getting something we don't want. Not getting what we do want. Where I'm never going to have enough money. I'm never going to be able to get this thing. I'm never going to find a girlfriend or a boyfriend or whatever it is. It's all going to always be like this. So and then impermanence is, we often think about impermanence as like usually the bad things about it, like I'm going to die, or flowers are going to die, or whatever it is. But we also, if we think about impermanence, thank goodness for impermanence. If it weren't for the chemical reactions in my body and your body, I couldn't move my arms. I couldn't have the mental acuity or whatever to be able to give you this talk. That's all predicated on impermanence. It's like impermanence makes the world function. Without impermanence, there would be nothing. It would be like everything would be set in stone. Nothing could move, nothing could change, nothing could interact, nothing could interbe with each other. So impermanence is an absolutely critical and important part of our world. Unfortunately, suffering also seems to be part of our world, and I think it's because as human beings, in some ways, having the brain that we have is a problem. And having this kind of brain often causes us, I think, to suffer. And I don't know what other beings are doing, but I'm sure that other beings are suffering as well. We see our pets are in pain or suffering in that way, and physical pain. I don't know about what kind of mental anguish they may not be going through, but I do know that as human beings, we are going through mental anguish at times, and so we are suffering. So the function, if you will, one of the primary functions of Buddhism is to alleviate suffering of self and other, so that we learn how to come to some kind of rapprochement. Is that the right word? Some kind of way that we are willing to be with our suffering in a way that doesn't, that we can do with equanimity, that we can do it in a way and be with ourselves in a way where we're not, to use a non-technical term, weenie beanies, just crazy about how we can't sort of seem to cope with things. So so that is part of the suffering. And then of course we physically suffer as well. We are in bodies. We get hurt, and that hurts and it's painful. And when we are in pain, we're usually suffering in pain, not just physically, but mentally as well. So that suffering seems to be endemic to this world, endemic to being a human being in a physical body. So again, the function of Buddhism is to figure out a way to work with this suffering so that we alleviate in self and others, as I just said. And then no inherently existing self does not mean that you don't have a self. It means that you do not have a self that is divorced from everything else. It means that we are in these interconnected, codependent relationships with everything. as the self. Do we have a personality? Yes. Do we have likes and dislikes? Yes. Do we want to dress a certain way or whatever? We're all different in many different ways. And we're also simultaneously all share these qualities as well: impermanence, suffering, and no inherently existing self. This self cannot, it's like, what was it? John Donne said, no man is an island. None of us are islands. Even if we're spending all of our time by ourselves, we're still not an island. We're dependent upon the air and the oxygen that we breathe, and we're dependent upon trees making oxygen, and we're dependent upon all the functionings of the whole world, including everything in our body, all these little organisms in our intestines that are doing all this stuff, that are busy living their own lives that we have don't know nothing about until we get a stomach ache. So it's like we're completely dependent upon the totality of the universe's functioning. So we are not inherently existing, which means we are not separate, permanent, disconnected. But again, this teaching does not mean that we don't have a self. We do have a self. We have independent selves, and we have personalities, etc. And likes and dislikes are not a problem except when they're a problem, right?
Yeah.
So are we, willing to let go of our likes and dislikes when letting go of our likes and dislikes is going to make the situation better, is going to make somebody else's life better, or our own life better? And often our likes and dislikes, we're so attached to them that we don't realize if we just let go of them, we would be happier than we are about running around trying to take care of those likes and dislikes. So, okay, so these are, wabi sabi comes out of this idea, and this idea that things are impermanent, and that means that they have imperfection. What is perfection? Perfection is some ideal or notion that we have about what something is that's perfect. So it's like, this is saying, Wabi Sabi is saying, no, just let go of that stuff. It's like, it's all in flux. It's all doing this thing, this kind of interplay with each other that's happening. So, don't dwell on what we think's wrong with ourselves or with others. If there's something that we're doing that's, I like to say, workable, if we're doing something that's unskillful and not workable, then hopefully we can realize that and ask ourselves, how can this be more workable? What can I do that will make this situation more workable? And if you're a Buddhist, you may just go back to Buddhist teachings and say it. If you're Christian, you might say, well, what would Jesus say? Whatever the religion is, or even if there's no religion involved, this way of saying, well, how can I engage in my life in a way with other people or other beings that makes things more workable? But we don't need to beat ourselves up. We don't need to dwell on this and beat ourselves up. And we don't need to do that to other people as well. There's this way that we can create generosity and spaciousness for each other. I don't know about you, but I am always grateful when I do something that's unskillful if another person gives me a little space to bang around. And it's like, I want to also do that for other people. And that we remember that none of us are perfect, right? Pursuing perfection is a myth. We live in a culture that absolutely is constantly inundating us with this idea that there's something called perfection. You're 20 years old and you need plastic surgery. It's like, because if you get it now and you keep doing little bits, you'll be perfect when you're 80, So it's like, it just doesn't work that way. Or that we're going to be this perfect human being. We're always going to be skillful. No, we're probably not always going to be skillful. It's like, so we're not going to have perfect health. That's the other thing. Somehow, right now we're like the longevity thing. If you spend a lot of money, or you do this or take that or do this, you're going to live, we don't know how much longer, but you're going to live a lot longer, and you're going to be a lot happier living a lot longer. Like maybe you'll be 120 before you die, and that it's not about quality, it's about quantity. So anyway, you all know what I'm talking about. It's like we're constantly being told that we have to be better, we have to be more beautiful, we have to be thinner, we have to be, I don't know what, we have to do Duolingo and learn 6 languages. It's like we just, all these things have to happen. So perfection is exhausting, and it's a myth. So why not just accept and enjoy things as they are as much as we can? Like, when I was younger, I really wanted people to be the way I wanted them to be so that I would like them because I had some idea about what a likable person was. Therefore, that's what I was looking for. As I've gotten older, I've realized that, especially doing teaching, is that there are lots of different kinds of people, and they're all great, you know, that I just let go of some idea about this perfect friend or this perfect student or this perfect this or it's perfect that. It's like that person doesn't exist. So, and I'm not perfect either. So what, how can the older I get, the more I realize, why don't you just meet people where they are? Like everybody's doing their best. Everybody's making an effort, and everybody, some people, I tell you, I had this student who was, she always saw the bright side of things. Everything was great, and that put me off at first because I'm not the most glowing, optimistic person in the world. And so I was like, oh, geez, it's like, this is like a little overwhelming. But the more I got to know her and realized, I just thought, where am I coming from? This is the most wonderful person in the world. She died of breast cancer. She was just her enthusiasm was real, and she was a teacher for me, not just in that way, but also in other ways that were directly reciprocity between the two of us. So, I just realized that, well, what was I up to? What was I thinking? Like, just how can you reject certain kind of personality type just because you decide that you don't like, in my case, like somebody who's overly enthusiastic? It's like, who's an optimist. So, yeah. So, I recently sent a book to a friend, and she wrote me back, and somebody, and I thought would enjoy this book. And she wrote me back and she said, "Oh man, I just really love this book. But this thing happened. I love this book so much that I was like reading it in the bathtub, and it fell in the bathtub, and now it's all wet." And it's on my coffee table, and I really regret dropping it in the bathtub because now it's all wrinkled and everything. And I thought, isn't that great? Isn't that really wonderful? It's like this book has a life. Now this book shows this life that it's lived. It's like, it's so that she enjoyed it so much, she took it in the bathtub with her and then accidentally dropped it in the water. And now it sits there on her coffee table, all wrinkled up. And, some of the pages probably stuck together. And it's like, this is a book that shows history. This is a book that, in a way, you say, like, people, wisdom, right? This book has its wisdom now, this life that it's not pristine. It's right, not, right out of the package. So I really love that about this book. So, yeah, so that's my understanding of what we're talking about here when we talk about wabi sabi. And the next one, the next one to me is a little problematic. It's Goemon, which probably many of you have heard about, usually in reference to Japanese Americans in the internment camps. And it's a way in which we have endurance with dignity. And I was thinking about the kind of stereotype of that, which is the individual who does not show the difficulties or suffering that they're going through. But when I think about Japanese culture, I think about people do not do this in a vacuum. They do this within the context of a community. There is this way in which everyone, in the case of the internment camps, everyone was going through a similar kind of hardship together, right? And they were making the best out of this difficulty. And I thought that's something that's pretty common through most of our cultures. that we do with each other. During World War II, you know, the English had, what was it? Um, keep calm and carry on, right? Or we talk about stiff upper lip, but usually we think about that as a person. But the whole culture was keep calm and carry on during World War II. I don't know what we said during World War II as an American culture, but if you think about something going on, like, you know, we have this as phrase, we'll say, Capitola strong, right? When the flooding happened in Capitola, we say Capitola strong or Chicago strong or whatever it is. When there's some kind of disaster that happens, people say, oh, you know, we're banding together, we're doing this thing together. And there's this way in which I think that endurance with dignity is this way that we come together, and instead of everybody wandering around as an individual, kind of going, woe is me, you know, we band together and say, what can we do to help each other? How can we get through this together and do this thing together? And that it isn't to say that people don't say to each other, wow, this is tough, you know, this is hard, this thing that we're doing. But there's also this thing of like, okay, let's get it done. Let's, you know, maybe in this culture we say, if you've got lemons, make lemonade, right? So this way in which we really pull together and try to find our equanimity in the midst of something that's distressing. It's not about denying that there's something that's stressful that's going on. It's about a willingness to kind of dig deep and find this way that we can do this together. And also, I would say that the problem I have with the kind of stereotype of this, and particularly in Japanese culture, because obviously I'm not Japanese, I'm not that familiar with Japanese culture. Be interesting if Sandy were here because of her grandparents. We could ask her, but she's not. And to say, you know, we should not understand this to mean that you have to do everything by yourself, that you can't express any dismay that you may have or something like that. So this is not about abusing the self, but this is about some way in which we you know, use our practice to create a kind of equanimity around our suffering, which is I was talking about before. This way in which I remember I was listening to a woman, a Zen teacher, I can remember her name, and she said, somebody asked her, she said, do you still suffer? And she said, yes, I still suffer, but in a different way. So it's like, if we are grieving, we need to grieve. We don't cut off our grief. If we're grieving, we need to grieve. If there's something difficult that's happened that makes us sad, or whatever those emotions might be, then we have those emotions. We don't cut off the emotion, but at the same time, we don't need to add anything to it, if that makes sense. So in the case of grieving, somebody might say, well, you can only, you know, you should only grieve for this amount of time. Well, that's ridiculous. You should grieve as long as it takes you to grieve. And that grief, though, may change over time. So the grief may go from being this gut-wrenching, every time this person, let's say you lose somebody close to you, every time something happens, you cry. I mean, you just walk around and you cry because this grief just overwhelms you. But over time, it's going to shift and change into something else, and you're going to have a different understanding of it. But you may never stop having grief over the loss of this person that you cared about, you know, but it does change. It becomes a different thing. It becomes, has a different shape and form. So we let that happen, you know, it's okay that that happens. But until that happens, it's okay that this other thing is happening as well. So it's not like we're trying to cut something off. It's more like that we have this expectation that, yeah, this is going to hurt. Yeah, this is what it's like to lose somebody close to me. I'm going to grieve, and that's okay. I'm going to suffer, and that's okay. I have that expectation that suffering is going to happen. And that shifts the nature of one's experience of suffering because we're not resisting it anymore. It brings a kind of dignity to that. Does that make sense? it brings a kind of acceptance and willingness to say, yeah, life's impermanent, you know, this person isn't always going to be here, or whatever that is. So I think that's tied up in this notion as well, this idea here of gaman, of endurance with dignity. The next one is omi omoe yari, omoe yari, which means compassionate consideration. And so omoe means thought, and yari is derived from yaru, which means to give or send. So it literally means thinking of others. So this is a kind of acting with kindness or thoughtfulness about your conduct, particularly out in public. So, for example, I don't know about you guys, but often you go to the airport or some place like that, and there's somebody conducting business in a very loud voice on their phone, which is in their ears. You know, they have on those little white Apple earplug things, and they're like going on about business at the top of their voice. And it's kind of like, I could really do without this for the rest of us. Or you're in a public place and somebody's watching videos on their cell phone or whatever, full blast. I read an article the other day in the Wall Street Journal about traveling with kids. And one of the people said, well, hey, that's what it's like to travel with kids. They're just they're just like make all this noise and they bang around and do all this stuff. And I'm thinking, well, okay, but what about the rest of us who maybe don't want to be traveling with your particular child who kicked the back of my seat all the way from South Carolina to San Francisco? So, you know, that we are aware of the fact of what we're doing and what, by extension, members of our family that we may be in taking care of are doing. And, you know, that by being conscious of our actions and how they ripple out and affect other people. So I'll tell you, there's this one thing that I do that might gross you out. I read somewhere that if there's a lot of paper on the floor in a bathroom, that people are more likely to throw paper on the floor, you know, like paper towels and things like that on the floor in a bathroom. So when I go to a public bathroom and there's stuff on the floor, I'll often pick it up and put it in the trash. And the reason I do that is because I don't like to go into the bathroom and have stuff all over the floor. And having read this, I thought to myself, well, if I pick up some stuff, then maybe the next person will not come in and throw their, hand their paper towel on the floor. I do pick it up with, something. Um, or when I was in Kyoto, the last time at the train station, the main train station in Kyoto, hundreds of people are trying to traverse these areas, and they're going diagonally through each other and not running into each other. It's almost like people have this sense of like a school of fish or something, where they are completely aware of each other, but not seemingly relating to each other. And they're able to do these kind of diagonal crossing events without running into each other. So this shows to me this kind of way in which people are completely aware of each other and able to avoid running into each other. Or even if we're walking down the street and somebody's coming down the street, we'll get out of their way to let them go by. And if they're not paying attention, let's say. And you just kind of naturally just step out of their way or whatever. So this way of being considerate when we're out in public, which I think is really super important towards de-stressing other people. I know it de-stresses me to not have to be in a public space where someone is taking up a lot of space and being completely unaware of the fact that there are other people there as well who are trying to live their life and do this. The other thing about this is that the idea of oh, I have one more story and then I'll go on the next thing. When Jaco and I, again, when we were in Kyoto, they have this Japanese have barley tea, which I can't remember the name of in Japanese. And so I had this bottle, plastic bottle that it had barley tea in it, but I couldn't read the Japanese. So I didn't, I was looking, I was in the train station. They have not exactly like 7-Elevens, but they're, like vending machines and stuff like that. And so I couldn't find this tea in the machine. And there was a guy walking by who was Japanese. And I managed to, like point at the bottle and point at this and say, and he said, no, they don't have them here. So I thought, okay, and he walked off. This guy found us 10 minutes later and he brought me barley tea in this, and he didn't ask for any money or anything. He just came up to me and he said, sumimasen, and he gives me the tea and takes off before I hardly had a chance to say thank you. So here's a way in which this guy was so considerate to me. He knew that I wanted something. I didn't need barley tea, but I wanted something, and he was so kind enough to go and find this and bring it back to me. It brought me to tears, that he was so kind and generous to do that. So, we just do these little things and you don't know how it's going to affect other people. And it really does. Sometimes it makes a huge difference in the level of somebody else's suffering. The next one is kintsugi, which we've probably most all seen, where you take gold and you join together a broken teacup, let's say, and you see the gold lines where it's been brought together. So in a Japanese tea ceremony, tea cups are considered to be, many of them are hundreds of years old. And they're these, very important objects. And although a friend of mine who's a tea teacher, she said that she was having tea with her teacher and accidentally broke one of these cups. And she felt absolutely terrible about it. And the teacher just said, oh, it's okay. It was broken anyway. So there's this way in which this sense of, yes, things get broken. We go back to impermanence. Things get broken, but kintsugi is like you put them back together in a way that they have a new life, right? They have this life with these gold veins running through them. Well, isn't that like what it's like to be a human being? Isn't that what it's like for us, is that we make mistakes, we get broken, and hopefully when we get put back together again, we are wiser, that maybe we have more equanimity than we had before. Sometimes that's like very, very, very hard to do. At other times, maybe it's not so hard to do. So I really encourage us to try to practice this equanimity and generosity when it's not so hard to do. So when something happens in our life that is really hard to do, that we have more capacity to do that thing. But it's a kind of embracing perfection. And this goes back to what I was saying about how our attitude towards other people. Embrace their imperfections, embrace their imperfections, embrace our imperfections, and have faith in each other, that we're all doing our best, and that when we recover from an imperfection, or when we do something that's imperfect, out of that often comes wisdom. If you never suffered, how could you ever have empathy? You wouldn't know what it was to suffer. If you never made a mistake, how could you be generous about another person's mistakes? Because we would never know what it was like to make a mistake. So out of our wisdom, people come and say, what about this? What about that? I'm living through this experience. Have you lived through this experience? Do you know what it's like? Can you help me with this thing? If we did not have these imperfections, how could we have the perfection of wisdom? So don't go out looking to break, but if break happens, then that is also a source of wisdom. And I don't think that, we should try not to reject that. Okay, so The last one I added because I feel like joy. I feel like right now, the antidote to a lot of the suffering that we're going through with politics and the world and our anxiety about what's happening and seeing this is find joy, you know, and whatever that might be, we can come up with ways to be joyous in Sangha. Maybe we should have a skit night and entertain each other, do something like that, sing together, whatever it is, to come up with ways as a group to have joy together, but also find joy in your own life. You know, I know a lot of people have pets and you find joy in your pets, whatever it is, that we do that and remember that this is a great antidote to a lot of the suffering that we're going through. And if we can create equanimity and some joy in our own lives, and watch a funny video on YouTube or whatever it is, or um, listen to music on Spotify and dance around your house and sing out of key. It's like all of those things really help us to find this equanimity and to de-stress in our own lives. Thank you.